Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Politically Incorrect Podcast. I'm Jim Williams. Uh, this is day 69 of the war between Israel and Hamas, and what we're going to do with the podcast as we transition into war is that we're going to go each day into a deep dive into what's going on the ground in Israel, as well as what's going on here in the United States with our involvement in the war. Now, each day we're going to start with Yvonne Levy, who is the Israeli government spokesperson, who's going to give the daily briefing. That's going to give you unedited, unfiltered information directly from the government as to what's going on the ground. We'll then come back and hit the headlines and our feature story for today, which happens to be about CENTCOM and the IDF and how they're working together. So before we get to that, let's get to Yvonne Levy from Tel Aviv as he tells us what's going on.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Israeli government spokesman Eylon Levy. This is day 69 of the October 7th war. First, a brief update, and then I will take your questions. We'll start with the latest figures. To date, over 1,200 victims of the 10/7 massacre have been identified, and 10,335 people have been injured since the start of this war. Hamas has fired over 12,500 rockets at the Israeli home front, with over 2,000 misfiring, the large majority falling inside Gaza and causing untold damage and casualties there. The IDF has notified families of the deaths of 445 soldiers. IDF fatalities have risen by 1 since yesterday's update, with the confirmed death of Master Sergeant Reserves Elisha Levinstern. May his memory be a blessing. Hamas is still holding 135 people hostage since 10/7, including 20 it has murdered in captivity, holding their bodies for a ransom. The hostages comprise 116 males and 19 females, and there are 2 children there, the Bibas infants abducted with their mother Shiri. We will continue doing everything in our power to bring back all the hostages, applying full military pressure on Hamas to release all of them from their terror dungeons. We will not rest until we have completed the mission to bring them all back home, no one left behind. Time is running out, and we demand again that the Red Cross use all its pressure to access those vulnerable hostages. An operational update: Israeli forces continue to do battle with Hamas terrorists dressed as civilians and fighting out of civilian buildings in Shejaiya, Jabalia and Khan Yunis. Yesterday, Hamas terrorists used a school in Khan Yunis as a base for shooting RPGs and anti-tank missiles at our forces. We uncovered long-range rockets and an underground combat compound in the area of the school and directed an airstrike on it. We also searched and dismantled a Hamas military compound in a school in Shejaiya. Israel repeats its call for remaining Hamas terrorists to surrender, as so many, but not enough, have. Earlier, over 70 terrorists emerged from the Kamal Adwan hospital, weapons in hand, and surrendered. The Israeli Defense Forces releasing this image just minutes ago. Those terrorists were apprehended and transferred to field interrogators from Israeli military intelligence and the Shin Bet for further questioning. We think it is outrageous that international officials from the World Health Organization and elsewhere are yet to condemn or even express concern about Hamas converting hospitals in the Gaza Strip into military bases. To them we say, you have not only let us down, you've not only let Palestinians in the Gaza Strip down, you've let down the whole world and the whole architecture of global governance, because this terrorist abuse of hospitals has been happening under your watch, and you continue to cover up for it and be complicit with this abuse of protected facilities through your shameful silence. We call on all Hamas terrorists in the Gaza Strip to surrender. It will speed up the decisive end of this war if they come out with their hands above their heads, preferably with a white flag. Despite Israel's efforts to minimize harm to civilians, Hamas is doubling down on its human shield strategy, intensifying its attacks on Israeli towns and cities from inside the Al-Mawasi humanitarian zone. To date, Hamas has fired 116 rockets at Israeli communities from inside the designated safe zone. Now, Israel designated this safe zone in Gaza, where Hamas had not already embedded itself inside and under schools, homes and hospitals, so that civilians could be protected. UN agencies feign concern for Gazan civilians, but bizarrely, none of them can bring themselves to condemn this Hamas war crime. To UNRWA, UNICEF, the World Health Organization and the Red Cross and others, we ask, what on earth is so difficult about condemning Hamas rocket fire at Israeli civilians from inside a humanitarian safe zone? Really, it's not difficult. Why are you covering up for Hamas instead of doing your jobs? Yesterday, at a situation assessment with Shin Bet director Ronen Bar and senior officials, Prime Minister Netanyahu stated that we are witnessing the beginning of Hamas's disintegration, as we see from those images of surrender. As we destroy Hamas, an Iranian proxy, in response to 10/7, the Prime Minister reaffirmed that we will also need to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. A humanitarian update, the Kerem Shalom crossing remains open for inspections of aid trucks, creating the capacity to more than double aid deliveries into Gaza. Now, whether that aid reaches the people of Gaza depends, of course, on whether Hamas stops stealing that aid and whether the aid agencies covering up for Hamas are able to catch up and deliver it at the pace that Israel is inspecting it. The IDF is enabling tactical pauses to allow civilians to replenish stocks, with one such pause today in the Al-Salam area of Rafah. Yesterday, the world received a shocking reminder of the importance of de-radicalization the day after Hamas, and we continue to call on the whole world to put in place plans to de-radicalize the Gaza Strip the day after, so that we can gain peace and security that we need as we rebuild the Gaza Strip, making sure that concrete go to people's homes and not to the terror tunnels that we found under hospitals. This afternoon, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is scheduled to meet with US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who is also scheduled to meet with President Herzog and members of the War Cabinet. Since the moment Hamas declared war with the 10/7 massacre, President Biden has demonstrated exceptional moral clarity and leadership in condemning the Hamas atrocities and reaffirming the necessity of an Israeli victory over Hamas. We thank the United States for its critical Security Council veto, ongoing supplies of weapons needed to destroy Hamas, and the strong message sent by 2 aircraft carrier groups to deter any further aggression against our people or expansion of this conflict. Since 10/7, we have welcomed President Biden for a historic solidarity visit, Secretary Blinken a number of times, Secretary Austin, and now the National Security Advisor. Israel and the United States, acting in unprecedented cooperation, see eye to eye about the need to end this war with the end of Hamas. Yesterday, the Prime Minister thanked the Armored Corps 460 Brigade for the sophistication of their operations against the Hamas terror regime. He vowed we will continue until victory, until the destruction of Hamas, and that nothing will stop us as we proceed with that sophistication that he praised to restore security to the people of Israel and bring to justice the 10/7 monsters. That's the end of today's briefing. We'll now take your questions. Thank you.
Williams, Zenger International News Service, Washington, D.C. While the US and Israel debate the best way to achieve the mutual goal of winning the war, isn't the biggest story how, at the order of President Biden, the United States Central Command, CENTCOM, to work with the IDF since October 7th terror attack, CENTCOM has been assisting the IDF on everything from high-tech satellite intel to helping to plan the dangerous street-to-street fighting being done by the IDF in Gaza. CENTCOM and the IDF are working in lockstep to bring the hostages home, defeat Hamas and reduce the number of innocent people killed in Gaza. Isn't that the bigger story than the political theatre going on now?
Jim, as a journalist, that sounds like an excellent story for you to cover. As we said, we thank the United States for the unprecedented cooperation between our nations as we see eye to eye about the need to continue this war until it ends with the end of Hamas.
Question from Joel Pollack, Breitbart News. Number one, celebrities such as Taylor Swift have attended fundraisers for Gaza without commenting on the atrocities of October 7th. Would you welcome Taylor Swift to visit Israel to see the affected communities? And secondly, could you comment on the UK travel ban on what it calls extremist settlers?
On your first question, we of course welcome visits by all leaders and influential figures who want to bear witness to the atrocities of 10/7 and show the world what our people endured during that horrific massacre and make clear why we are fighting to defend ourselves and defend our children and make sure this war ends so that children can sleep safely in Kfar Aza, Be'eri and near Oz. Again, as for the question from the United Kingdom, we of course deplore all extremist violence, wherever that may be. There is a lot of extremist violence inside the West Bank, particularly from the direction of Palestinian terrorists, but we deplore all extremist violence. There is no excuse for vigilantism or hooliganism, and we will continue to insist that all extremist violence be dealt with the full force of the law.
Adam Scott Bellos, the Israel Innovation Fund now have agreed to as per refugees. Are there any updates and figures available about the flooded tunnels?
Adam, I'm a spokesman for the Israeli government, not the Egyptian or Jordanian governments. Israel is urging Palestinians in the Gaza Strip to move to the Al-Mawasi humanitarian zone. That is where we want them to be protected and safe and to receive the humanitarian aid they need. And we think that what the international community needs to do is to direct people to the safe zone instead of directing them towards Hamas strongholds, as the aid agencies that feign concern for them have been doing. And of course, as I said, to condemn Hamas firing rockets out of the humanitarian safe zone. It really isn't very difficult to do.
Question from David Isaac at JNS. The issue of settler violence keeps getting brought up. The US announced a travel ban on violent settlers, and just now the UK, the Biden administration is reportedly holding up a shipment of rifles, fearing they'll fall into the hands of extremist settlers. But Israeli police statistics don't show any surge in extremist settler violence, as the White House claims. So far, we haven't heard any pushback from the Prime Minister on this issue. In fact, the opposite. He's confirmed the White House accusations. Can we expect the Prime Minister to make a statement refuting these charges? Why hasn't he done so?
David, we just addressed the question about extremism violence in response to the previous question.
And finally, from Joel Pollack at Breitbart News, is there a plan to replace the tens of thousands of agricultural workers who have left? Is the planting season for spring in danger?
At the moment, we've seen an incredible mobilization of Israeli society towards the goal of trying to prop up our economy and keep everything moving as we face the unprecedented challenge of such a large call-up of the reserves to defend and deter on the southern and northern borders. Beyond that, I have no information.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Keep safe, happy Hanukkah, and we'll update you about tomorrow's briefing.
Okay, thanks to Elon for the briefing. Okay, let's hit the headlines for today. The first one up is the National Defense Authorization Act passed the Senate today, 310 to 118. I'm sorry, that should be the House, not the Senate. President Biden is expected to sign it before the end of the day Friday, if not sooner. Now, what happened in the House on this one was that the hard right, basically the folks in the Freedom Caucus, were against a number of issues in the bill. But the moderates prevailed, and at the end of the day, it passed. As you say, pretty amazingly from 310 to 118. So President Biden will sign that into law. Now, how does that affect what we're talking about here with war? Well, it gives money, because it's a budget for the United States military, money necessary for Ukraine, Israel, and other countries that the United States supports from a military standpoint. It is not to be confused with the money that is tied up, and we'll get to that in a minute, in the bill that is presently in the Senate, having to do with $1.6 billion in aid that would go to Israel, the Ukraine, Taiwan, and the southern border. Okay, so that's a different situation. So today's passing of the of the National Authorization Act is important in so much as we're talking about military hardware and not money that will be used by the government to work on everything from humanitarian aspects to military aspects, which is the type of funds that will be coming from the Senate bill. Okay, so that is to kind of split the difference of what's going on. All right, so let's talk about that for a moment. The Senate may hang around this weekend. Now, yesterday I told you that it was unlikely that they would hang around. That didn't look like there's a deal to be had. Well, there is some conversation, and I said yesterday that President Biden is looking to do a deal. Senate Majority Leader Schumer, Senate Minority Leader McConnell have been working hard to come to an agreement. Now, what is it that's holding the bill up? Well, according to the New York Times, what the Republicans want in this bill is, to work on a tougher, basically tougher actions at the U.S. southern border. Now, this really is a deal where aid to Ukraine, and we know that with President Zelensky in the country this week to talk about it, he needs it for his continued fight against Russia, and of course the Israelis need it for their fight against Hamas. What has happened is the money for the southern border, which is quite extensive in this bill, would certainly help down there. But the problem is, and it's for security, it's basically done for security reasons, and at the end of the day, the problem is the Republicans want to make it difficult for people to gain asylum in the United States, a demand that the White House has signaled they're willing to consider some of it. Okay, now some of it, not not some of the draconian ideas that was around in the Trump administration. Now, the Republicans want to restore the policies that would gain either rapid return of people, turning them away at the border, or force them to wait in Mexico until the asylum cases are heard. That was something that President Trump used as methods to shut down the border to migrants. Now, Republicans are seeking to expand a policy known as expedited removal. Now, that is to rapidly deport undocumented immigrants, and also they want to restrict the use of immigration policies known as humanitarian parole. Now, here's where this gets a bit dicey. The humanitarian parole has been there for years, and it's allowed Afghans, Ukrainians, and others from Central and South America to flee war and violence and to come to the United States for asylum. The Republicans say that needs to be totally overhauled and to contend with the border crossings, and which has surpassed 10,000 people per day. So at the moment, we don't have a deal. We'll find out in the next 24 hours if indeed there is a deal to be had. At this moment, it doesn't look like that's going to happen, although, stranger things have. So we'll keep you posted on that. Some breaking news that just came in a few minutes ago, and that is that the European Union has decided to open negotiations with Ukraine to join NATO. Now, that's something that really had been talked about last year, as some of you may remember. But there was always the key opposition from Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. But the European Council President Charles Michel, who's been, working out of Brussels on the summit with the 27 European Union leaders, said the decision to add them right now is something that they feel needs to be explored. So the Ukraine finally becoming a member of NATO could take years, but it's got to start somewhere. And right now, the the European Union seems to think it's going to be a victory for all of Europe if indeed Ukraine can join the NATO alliance and also potentially become a member, of the European Union. So that's all coming down here. And by the way, Moldova is also being considered as a possible member of the European Union. So NATO and the European Union situation is certainly becoming a possibility for the Ukraine. So that's very much a very important thing, which we will follow for you. So now here's our cover story. The story which you will be able to read tomorrow in Zenger, as well as a number of other sites which are in the show box below. And that is how the U.S. Central Command and the IDF have a role in what's going on in the Israeli-Hamas war. Now, while President Joe Biden is trying to walk that very thin line between the pressure from the Democrats on the left and the far-right Republicans, he has supported Israel, and it's not been in any way, shape, or form unwavering. He has actually put up a very strong point having to do with the ability to make sure that they do not call a ceasefire, because he feels that that would be an opportunity for Hamas to rebuild. So he doesn't want that to happen. He's holding hard on that. The Republicans, on the other hand, where that's a problem for him, is they are basically holding hostage the money for not just Israel, but for Ukraine, having to do again with the southern borders we talked about, as well as in some cases, as we saw with the House, where it becomes budget neutral. So they're actually saying, all right, fine, we'll give you the $14 billion if you take $14 billion out of the IRS budget, which of course is 40% of the budget. So that's not going to happen. So as the political theater plays out in Washington and Tel Aviv, what's really happening behind the scenes with the two countries as far as real things that matter, okay, at this point. Overlooking the calm blue-green waters of Tampa Bay, you're going to find MacDill Air Force Base. Now, it is home to United States Central Command. Now, U.S. CENTCOM, as it is known, covers a global located group of countries in Europe, Africa, and the Indo-Pacific. Okay, and while Tampa is 600, basically 6,600 miles from Tel Aviv, the two cities are linked by this war between Israel and Hamas. The Israeli Defense Force, or as we know it, the IDF, and CENTCOM are working closely as they develop a plan to bring the hostages home, defeat Hamas, while doing the least bit of harm to the residents of Gaza. Now, CENTCOM is run by Commander General Michael E. Kurla, and he has made 2 trips to Israel since the October 7th attack. On October 17th, he was in Tel Aviv to conduct high-level meetings with Israel's military leadership, including the Chief of Defense, which is General Herzi Halevi. According to the Pentagon, the meeting went quite well. And he also met with the War Council. Now, in a statement later issued by the Pentagon on October 17th, he said that his visit was, I'm here to ensure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself. And I'm particularly focused, I should say, on avoiding the expanding of the conflict. So, 2 things CENTCOM's doing. 1, they're helping the IDF on the day-to-day issues of fighting Hamas in Gaza, while looking again to make sure that there is not an expansion of this war into other places which would stretch the military, which right now can't afford that kind of stretch. Now, Krula, who is, as we said before, the man in charge of CENTCOM, the general, has extensive knowledge of the Middle East. Among his many assignments that he's been involved with include Desert Shield / Desert Storm, which had him in Saudi Arabia, as well as Iraq, Operation Iraqi Resolution, as well as Operation Enduring Freedom. Both of those are in Afghanistan. Operation Inherent Resolve, which was in Iraq, and he also served as the Joint Staff Deputy Director of the Special Operations on Counterterrorism. So you see, he's got tremendous background, not just in what goes on in the region and who the players are in the region, but his understanding of how they work and how the counterterrorism situation, when they fought ISIS and other terrorist groups in the region, Boko Haram among others. He understands how they think, how they operate, and he's very much the best point person to lead the group at CENTCOM in this situation, helping the IDF as well as making sure they get what they need. Now, not only, as I said, are they using the state-of-the-art satellite intel technology to share with Israel, but they also have the boots on the ground to do some old-school personal communications using the years that they have built up in the region with the knowledge that they know what's going on. They know who the players are, and they know who they need to stop. Okay, so at present, U.S. CENTCOM has 46 countries, including Israel, that are part of their coalition network. So that means that they can not only draw from information they have, but information that 46 other countries have been able to glean over years to give Israel a better understanding not only of who they're fighting, but how best to fight them and how best to take Hamas out from a standpoint of making sure they're no longer a threat, not just militarily but politically, in Gaza. So, look, the information shared by the U.S. CENTCOM with the IDF on how to fight door-to-door battles, the Israelis are using that now on a daily basis, and basically it's clear that while the political theater is always going to be there, the real work that is being done behind the scenes with the cooperation of the IDF and CENTCOM is what we should be focusing on. So there you go. The entire story, our cover story, will be dropping within the next 24 hours. You'll be able to read it at Zenger.news or any of the links below where you might be able to find it. Again, once it's published, it takes about 24 hours to get into the system. So hang with us on there. It'll be there. You'll be able to read it. Some of the other cover stories you can look for is whether or not the Red Cross is doing everything that they can, which we will be delving into, because we have not yet had the Red Cross see the hostages. It's been since October 8th since they have been being asked by a number of people, pressure being put on them by not just Israel, but the United States, the UK, France, and other countries to get to that. We will get touch base on that. We'll touch base on what's going on for the day after. And we'll certainly have guests. Look forward to, in the next couple of days, having Alan Joel Steinberg, one of our buddies here. If you know anything about the podcast, you know that Alan has been with us on a couple of occasions. Most recently, talking about Henry Kissinger and what his impact on the world from a diplomatic standpoint, was. And so Alan will be with us. Alan worked with as an advisor to President George W. Bush, as well as spent a great deal of time advising the Israeli government on a number of different issues. So we'll have Alan, we'll have some of your favorite journalists joining us, and so plenty of stuff to look forward to right here on the Politically Incorrect podcast. Now, if you don't have a chance to watch us on YouTube, which is cool, you can also get us where we started, which was the podcast realm, and that can be found at Apple, Amazon Music, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, as well as iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, or as they like to say, wherever you get your podcasts. All right. Also, if you can, greatly appreciate it. Doesn't cost anything. Do me a favor. Hit the bell, subscribe, like us, and leave a comment. By all means, you don't have to agree with what we do or what we say. If you do, that's fine. If you have a question for us or you have a question you want us to ask, by all means, leave it. If you have a comment that you want us to reply to, once again, leave it. We'll be happy to do it. Okay? All right, cool. So anyway, we will be with you tomorrow. And as I said before, there's a lot of moving parts here. We're going to be giving you the daily briefing with Alon. We're going to be giving you as much information as we can, as quickly as we get it. And so by all means, it's not to steal Rachel Maddow's tagline, but watch this space. We will be trying to keep you advised as best we can to what's going on. All right, everybody? It's a team effort, so as I said before, subscribe, hit the bell, like us, leave a comment, and if you listen to us on podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review and say that you like what we're doing, and we'll keep doing it. So we'll see you tomorrow, and until then, have a great last night of Hanukkah, and we will see you tomorrow. Take care.